Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where you think we got it completely wrong, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com, our Rumble channel, or other social media channels. So, Brian, what is going on in the world today that Kenny G might be interested in?
Well, as looking back, there's going to be lots of questions, I think, from Kenny G and his generation. And for those who don't know who Kenny G is the guy in the future we're talking to, say, 60 years from now, undoubtedly looking back and saying, what the hell are those people thinking?
Exactly.
And I think one of the questions Kenny G is, how do they not see it coming? I think that's going to be one of the things that Kenny G is asking. And so I found a clip here. It's pretty interesting. This is John Kerry. Well, you can explain better than I can probably who John Kerry is.
Yeah, so John Kerry had a role in the Addams Family. He played Lurch. No, sorry. That's wrong one. So I just couldn't help it. So John Kerry was the Secretary of State, and most recently, he has been the climate czar for the Biden administration, which means he goes around the world shaking his finger at people, telling them to use less carbon and talking about strategies for doing that, or at least trying to shame people.
Going around the world in his private jet.
In his carbon spewing private jet, telling everybody else that they should, be cold and not use their gas fireplace and such. Yes, that's John
democracy.
Kerry. Yeah, it's democracy.
Right. Well, here John Kerry had some thoughts on the First Amendment, and I thought that they were worth sharing here. So I'm going to share my screen, and you're gonna love this, Dave. It's
I'm sure
it's fantastic. I think so. Let's hear what Mr. Kerry has to say about his thoughts on the First Amendment. It's about a 2-minute clip, so it's a little long, but I think it's pretty interesting.
All right.
And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact have kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go and people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways. And
so
that's
you're
really
questioning
dangerous.
really if democracy can survive unregulated social media?
I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States?
All right. So what do you think of that?
Well, I am disappointed that it didn't start with you rang, but we'll let that one go.
I grew up in a middle class family.
Yes,
that's how most answers are started nowadays. Is I grew up in a
I was raised in the middle class. Exactly. That is the 21st century. Well, unfortunately, Brian, I think that one thing is you and I are are sad sinners because we self-select what we decide to listen to and get our news sources from. So I think we have to repent of that, clearly. I mean, come on. This guy is just an authoritarian wannabe that doesn't like the fact that you and I can determine on our own, using our own agency, our own God-given agency, what we think makes sense and what we think doesn't make sense. He bemoans the fact that government isn't big enough to just force us into his way of thinking, and isn't big enough to say, here are the facts. And I mean, everything he's talking about has a chapter in Orwell's book,
Yeah.
The Ministry of Truth, everything that Kerry is talking about here. And the thing that's so, at the end of the day, that's so utterly infuriating about it is this smug presumption that he has that he's better than the rest of us and that he's smarter than the rest of us.
Yep.
He might have more degrees than I do. He might have more power than I do, but I'd be happy to sit down with him and have a philosophical conversation any day of the week and see if he can, hold his own when the media sources aren't strictly controlled by him, when the truth is not strictly managed by people that are sycophantic followers of his. That's what I think.
Yeah. It appears to me that okay, and there's two ways I'm looking at this. One is, if you take into context the video you and I did about a month ago from Yuri Bezmenov,
yes,
talking about how the what do you call it, the international communist conspiracy,
right?
And then last week we listened to Mike Benz talk about the blob and like how over time, or in 2014 specifically, it was too much work to say democracy is bad, so we're just going to call democracy. When we say democracy, we're going to mean the taking care of the institutions, not taking care of the citizens, right? So I kind of find myself looking at through both lenses. One is through the lens of, like, if you hadn't ever heard Mike Ben say that, if you hadn't ever heard Yuri Bezmenov say that, and you still think that the government is about looking out for the best interests of the citizens, then I'm sitting there going, again, you have more degrees than me, Mr. Kerry. You have more experience in a lot of things. You have all this global status and blah, blah, blah. But I think even with my imbecilic view of the Constitution, you missed the point of the First Amendment.
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
Right? And like, he speaks about consensus. I don't think the country is founded upon building consensus. The country is built upon the diversity of ideas, what I thought.
Right.
So there's that. He mentioned the refs. We used to have refs, and they've been eviscerated. Well, the refs were media, Hollywood, the military industrial complex, big corporate, like all the usual suspects, right?
Right.
And those institutions are trusted so little now that he's right. They have been eviscerated.
Right.
Then he went on to say that we needed to curb those entities that are allowing people to, these dopes out there finding their crazy ideas. Like, I don't know, COVID didn't come from a pangolin or whatever the hell that story was. Like, and again, you look at the New York Times and other entities like that seeming to follow some kind of 18-month pattern after the conspiracy theory is first said. Then 18 months later, they come out and say that that's news. Well, he wants to curb the entities that first made it news.
Right.
And then he said something I just found like super fascinating. Again, looking through the lens as if we still believe that it's the government is looking out for the best interests of the people. He talked about, if you only find your information from one source and that source is sick. And I thought, what entity in the history of mankind has ever spewed more misinformation than government?
Yes, exactly right.
Like, not everything, many, I don't know, 82% of the things we've been told by the government in the last 5 years have turned out to be not true.
Right.
They're simple things like revising the unemployment numbers to big things like it's the winter of death if you don't get the COVID vaccine, and like it covers a whole range.
Yeah.
If you want to point at a singular source who spews misinformation, I would look no further than the U.S. government at this point, right?
Well, and not even just spews misinformation, but if you look over the broad history of planet Earth, the entities that have harmed more people killed more people than anything else is government. I mean, see, this goes back to his original point too. He's saying in his understanding of the Constitution, as you said, is essentially to support the wisdom of the institutions. But the founders thought there was wisdom in the broad scope of humanity, that there's more wisdom in the broad breadth of humanity applied than you can ever find in a bureaucracy, in a government institution. And so he doesn't get it. He takes the totalitarian view that we need priest kings to rule over us without question, and that the founders were wrong, that the wisdom of the masses is not wisdom at all.
Yeah. And for Kenny G, in case the history books don't denote this, this is the guy who says cow flatulence is a huge part of climate change, and we got to get rid of cows. Like, okay, so that's where that guy's at. And I
think somebody should measure his flatulence.
I would be inclined to listen to the farmers in Colorado and Kansas over his opinion about cows' harm to the earth. Okay, so now let's listen to the same. I got 4 points here. Same 4 points now through the lens of the reframing of democracy protecting the institutions. Okay, we used to have consensus. Yeah, well, and for how many years did they have consensus behind the scenes that we didn't know that they had consensus?
Right.
We thought news and all these things were calling balls and strikes, and they really weren't. There was a unified voice on how to do things that now has been betrayed by the likes of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and RFK and on and on and on. Right? We used to have referees. Now they've been eviscerated. Well, you used to have people who kept things in check and balance according to our way of thinking, like the institutions matter. And it kind of sounds like we used to have referees, which were referees that we might have slid a couple $100 bills to make sure the calls go our way, right?
Exactly.
We need to curb those entities. So now it's not about, now it's, if we're protecting the institutions, like those entities that are against the institutions, they must be crushed. Right? You cannot allow them. And probably, I don't know, it was probably a coincidence, but I think it was it Hillary Clinton this week that said Elon Musk was like the biggest threat to democracy or whatever, because he was allowing this misinformation. Like, and by the way, Kenny G, if you do nothing else, get rid of the word misinformation.
Yes,
it's like, good grief. And then the sources, if you only get your news from one source, which I'm guessing he's probably referring to a place like Twitter, which is the only not in alignment source of media at this point.
Right.
Maybe Rumble you could put up there, but Twitter's, infinitely bigger than Rumble. If you only have one source and that source is sick, like what it changed the entire paradigm of his conversation. If you look at through the lens of believing the government's still looking out for the people versus looking through the lens of the government's really after protecting the institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And it really struck me when he said sick. He didn't say incorrect. He didn't say, he didn't even use misinformation. It's like misinformation means you don't believe my opinion. That's all misinformation is. I mean, it's just it's such a deceptive word in these days. But when he said the word sick, basically that's sort of an emotional response to challenges to his authority. I mean, that's really what it is. At the end of the day,
it could be morally sick. It could be, in his view, corrupted and sick. Yeah. I mean, the wrong people could be in charge, and then making the organization sick. Yeah.
Well, and then of course the cure to that, his discussion then about the failings of democracy. He basically indicts democracy. He says democracy isn't big enough, and it isn't strong enough in order to solve these problems. So what are you saying, John? What are you saying, Lurch? Are you saying that we have to do away with democracy and maybe come up with, I don't know, maybe an autocracy, a dictatorship? Is that what? I mean, that's really I mean, it doesn't. It's not a big leap to just go straight there.
If you force yourself to look through the lens of like the government really cares about this, none of this makes any sense.
Right.
But if you look at through the lens of we're protecting institutions, it's like an aha moment. It's like, holy crap, this really makes sense now, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
So you got Lurch doing his remake of the black and white TV show, The Addams Family, which, by the way, I was young enough. That was still on reruns on TBS when I was like 9. I still watched black and white TV when I was a kid.
It was classic. So, he really should have stayed there. He really should have stayed there.
Kenny G's going to think I'm a real rube now. All right. So then a number of things happened in the news this week that we can go through these pretty quick, but I thought they were really fascinating. One of them is an AP story about the Hezbollah leader. I don't know how to say his last name. I think it's Hassan Nasrallah. I think that's how you say it.
Nasrallah.
And I'm just going to read the headline. This is from AP, Associated Press. Like, arguably, like, I don't know, 25 years ago, top 5 most credible news or entities in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Here's I didn't read that story because the headline was enough for me, but here's the headline. Charismatic and shrewd. A look at longtime Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Charismatic. This guy's charismatic and Trump's Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah, let's compare how many people Trump ordered to be assassinated versus Hezbollah.
This is just it's laughable only because if you don't laugh, like it just makes you really angry. Like this entire news world has been flipped on its head. And then John Kerry is wondering, like, why do people get news and alternative sources? Why is that happening?
Why are referees not trusted anymore? Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about it,
why would people seek out information besides the party? Why would they do that? Well, if you have a half a conscience, you read that story and you go, "That's bullshit."
Yeah, a fawning line about an internationally designated terrorist organization who is responsible. You know, probably a lot of people don't know all the history of Hezbollah, but you know, they are responsible for killing many, many Americans. I mean, we're not just talking about Jews. We're talking about they've killed plenty of Israelis, but they've killed plenty of Americans. Remember when we were growing up, Beirut was sort of synonymous. There was that the bombing of the Marines in Beirut. I mean, so the terrorism in that part of the world has been strong, and he was one of the lead terrorists working for the Iranian regime, the biggest state sponsor of terrorists. And so the only way you could really understand this is if you sort of reposition that headline to say, you know, when the leader of Germany died after World War II, we know who that was, right? If the New York Times
it was Trump, right? Wasn't it Trump's grandfather?
Yeah. They accused Hitler of being like Trump, but the left said no, that's not true.
Hitler had to leave because they were too bad for Germany, right?
Yeah, Hitler can't be that bad. But you know, if you replace Nasrallah with Hitler and then say, here, reread that headline, then that's what you get. That's
charismatic and shrewd.
Yeah, I mean, how in the world can you have a fawning headline like that, basically praising the guy in the news, and he's responsible for the deaths of our neighbors? I mean, give me a break. There's cognitive dissonance on a level you can't even
every week
understand.
I mean, it seems like it's literally every week now, every so often for sure. The news, I say this on my page or whatever, because it's like every week there's this, like, you can't stoop that low. You can't beat that. And the next week they come up with it, like, he's charismatic and shrewd. Like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right. So that's how our news is unfolding. And Kenny G, I suspect you'll be reading about what news organizations were in history books because they will have long been gone.
That's right.
All right. So then also, and after this one, I'll get to the main thing I was going to talk about today. But the Department of Justice sues Alabama over attempt to remove non-citizens from voter rolls.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard about that.
Oh, it's stop, Dave. The SAVE Act is not needed. It's already illegal for people to vote. You guys are wasting a bunch of time over nothing. How dare you tie this to the omnibus bill? Like, it's already illegal for people to vote. Like, you guys are barking up the wrong tree. Oh, but we're going to sue you if you try to expunge your voter rolls of these people.
Well, and you know, one of the things that strikes me about that is that in that same period of time, in the same, you know, weekly news cycle, we also heard from ICE that there are somewhere around 450,000 criminal illegal aliens that are not currently in custody, that are wandering around the United States someplace. So with 450,000, that's a good chunk of, to me, that's a big chunk of people. I don't know. I mean, it seems like a big chunk of people to me. So what you decide to spend your time in as the Department of Justice is going into Alabama and saying, don't do this. Don't take extra measures to make sure that non-citizens can't vote in our elections. Rather, you spend your time doing that rather than spending whatever resource was necessary for that to go out and maybe find some of these people who are literally rapists. They are people that have been convicted of rape, murder, child abuse, child sex crimes. This is what these people have been convicted. Well, we don't have the resources to do it. Yeah, because you're spending all your time worrying about what the people in Alabama are working on to keep their elections safe and secure. I mean, it's just infuriatingly stupid that kind of prioritization takes place. And this is what government does all the time now. It looks for feel-good issues on one side of the aisle and spends time on that while ignoring the things. And in Washington, you are happily no longer, for your sake, a Washingtonian.
I got out before the wall was put up.
Yes, that's right. Well, I see the brown shirt. Anyway, I won't go there. In Washington, we spend all this time on all these, what I consider non-issues. They're, social statements and this type of stuff. And the bloody roads that I'm driving down are continually requiring me to get new tires because they don't do their basic job, and this is the Department of Justice has a certain amount of resources, money, authority that they could spend on things that are like high priority things, like maybe catching rapists, reincarcerating them. A lot of these people have been convicted, and then ICE can't hold them for a certain period of time, even if they're guilty of a heinous crime. They're limited by law about how long they can hold them. Well, the Department of Justice could certainly figure out a way to at least get the rapists, the homicide people, the criminals, get them off the streets. You would think. I don't know.
Well, if they wanted to, yes.
Yeah, if they wanted to. Yeah, if they
Gavin
thought it was
Newsom
important.
also signed a law into this week that prohibits any ID being asked in California to vote. So,
well, yeah. So if I was a Californian, I think my response to that would be, I don't have an ID at all, and you can't prevent me from getting on an airplane. You can't prevent me, or if you pull me over on the freeway, you can't ask for my ID, because if you do, you're a bloody racist.
Okay, I know that you're at your tenure at Evergreen State. They tried to flush this out of your system. You're using this thing called logic, Dave. That does not apply, and that's a major problem. All right, so now the I think possibly the biggest story. I mean, I would put this up there with the Trump assassination, at least the first one, and maybe even the second one. Arguably the biggest news story of the year, I would say, is this report that came out from ICE. What is ICE? The
Immigration's Custom Enforcement.
Okay, all right. So along the lines of what you're talking about, with like people wanting to keep murderers and rapists out,
right?
Did you see this story about 13,000 people in the country, in the U.S. today, are convicted, not suspected, convicted of homicide in other places?
Yeah.
16,000 of sexual assault, and 1,845 are charged with homicide, but have not been convicted.
Right.
So this kind of goes back to what you and I talked about in the very beginning of doing this podcast, like the sheer volume of people coming over between, what is it? I've heard between 10 and 21 million. I don't know what the number is. It's somewhere in that range.
Millions of some sort.
If 1/10 of 1%, if 1/2 of 1% of those are really bad people, like it's just a ticking time bomb. It's just it's not a matter of if anymore. It's a matter of when and where. Right. And now we have proof that these are actual people, actually convicted of actual crimes, and no discussion about it. No discussion from the John Kerrys of the world, no discussion from the Hillary Clintons of the world, no discussion from the Kamala Harrises of the world. I mean, Biden's asleep, so he can't talk about anything. But what I find fascinating, I think Greg Gutfeld, I saw a clip of him talking about this, and he had a great point, which was, you see fact checks on all kinds of stuff. Why don't they fact check this? And okay, let's say it is only 8,000 convicted murderers instead of 16,000. Like, what? Why wouldn't we fact check that? So it's just, it's so blatant. Like you say, the things that are supposed to make you feel good, they got tons of energy for.
Right.
The things that are actually factually harmful, no time.
Right. Well, and the reasons, I think, are pretty obvious. One of them Now, and just to be fair, a lot of those folks have come over the last 10 years or so. So it's not only on Biden's watch, but it accelerated on Biden and
Predominantly.
Harris'
I
watch.
mean, you can
Predominantly,
see that you can see the charts of how many people came across each year, and
right?
it hits 2020 and it just like
And it
balloons.
skyrockets. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so the reason, and see, this is what is so disturbing about it, is there is nobody who can argue with a straight face that having people that have been convicted of murder just wandering around the streets, or convicted of rape, or convicted of child sex crimes wandering around the street is an okay thing. I don't think there's anybody that could argue that. And so therefore it has to be ignored. Well, why does it have to be ignored? It has to be ignored because it undercuts a narrative that keeps a certain group of people in power. It's, and this is again back to, I mean, you can have different opinions about certain things and you can disagree about certain things, but if there is a straight line between fact A, B, C, and D, then you can pretty well conclude that's accurate. And by that I mean simply that the only reason not to parrot it, or to trumpet this and go after it, is because it's embarrassing to certain people. So the people in power, the institutions, have failed us completely. I mean, you can't look at those numbers and come up with any other conclusion. If you do, I laugh at you. It's just ridiculous because these are dangerous people convicted by our own courts. And so therefore,
or other countries' courts, like
or other countries' courts. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, or Trump got in a bunch of trouble for saying they're not sending us their best and brightest, they're sending us rapists and murderers. Well, I kind of guess that's true now. I mean, based on what we've seen, based on these numbers that come out as official government numbers, by the way, there's not,
I would guess if you did a census of 2015 numbers of people in Guatemalan insane asylums and prisons and did a census today, you'd probably find a pretty decent downturn.
Well, what a great deal for them. Who can blame them, right? It's like, your Statue of Liberty did say send us your destitute. We didn't say send us your murderers, please. We didn't say that.
But there's reporting, again, I don't know how accurate it is because I don't have time to do my own research on all this stuff, but there's reporting from, I would consider, credible people that the governments of those countries are saying you can get out of prison, but you have to go to the US.
Right.
If
right.
you stay, you're going to go back to prison. You go to the US, you don't. Like, okay, well, that's pretty easy math on their part, I'd say.
Well, and for those governments, it makes sense. We don't have to house you. We don't have to feed you.
Yeah.
We got some lousy people that are out here. What a great deal. I mean, if the Americans are stupid enough to allow that to happen, which clearly we are because it is happening by our own government's admission, then, but it is so insidious that those in power are not are not even acknowledging it. So it's all, yes, you're right. It's only the center right where you're finding any reporting on this at all. The center left isn't talking about this. The centrists aren't talking about this. I listen to the centrists. I listen to the center left. I don't listen to MSNBC, unless somebody's holding me down with a gun to my head. But for the most part, I don't listen to MSNBC, but I do listen to center left commentators, and I don't hear a word about this on those different channels. And it's just because they're supporting their people.
Would you put this in like top 3 stories of the year so far?
Oh, absolutely. I would. I mean, it's got to be. I mean, because this is they could be out here outside of my office right now. I mean, they could be outside of your place right now. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of very bad people.
Yeah. Yeah, what is there? There's like 3,500 counties in the country. I mean, that's 4 a county or something like that. I mean, that's
right.
That's insane.
And here's something that just occurred to me, Brian. Whenever a registered sex offender moves anywhere within, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 miles of me, I get a thing in the mail that says this RSO has moved into your neighborhood, and this is the picture, this is what they're accused of, and all this, because we know where they are. They're being tracked. We know where they are. From what I understand, there's a lot of these people, we just don't have any clue where they are. They could be in my neighborhood, and the government hasn't sent me a notice to tell me that there's a murderer.
No, that's on a need to know basis.
I don't need to know.
Qualify. I get, so this like twofold for me. Like, one is just like the news organizations have just lost all credibility. They don't cover the top 3 story. This is coming from Matt Schellenberger, who did the X-Files and all that kind of stuff. So John Kerry wants to know why people don't listen to them anymore, why the referees have been eviscerated.
Right.
This is why the referees have been eviscerated.
Yeah.
And also, then you have people like with legitimate political power and influence not on the table, not interested, zero conversation about this.
Right.
And so my question for you then is this just like you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet? Like this is just the spillage? Like this is just the cost of doing business of importing these people? Or is somehow like this part of the plan?
Well, neither one of those is a good option. But
is there a different one?
Well,
I mean, honestly,
there isn't a different option. No, there isn't a different option. I think it's probably a combination of those two things. I mean, the only reason that anybody cares about immigration outside of the border states now is because Greg Abbott and others put them on buses and sent them to New York and Chicago. Brilliant. I mean, that always is a racist action. It was brilliant. It was utterly brilliant.
I only wish they would have done it to Martha's Vineyard more than once. That I gotta say, of all the things that have disappointed me over the last couple of years, that's in the top 10 that they did it one time and somehow they just one and done. They should do it every single freaking day.
Yeah, they should have had a bus line dedicated just to Martha's Vineyard. I totally agree. But
100%.
But it seems to me,
and to John Kerry's house specifically, of course.
Absolutely. Well, I think doesn't Barack Obama have a nice place there?
Oh yeah.
The water.
Don't you worry.
Right near the waters. But he's probably gonna get swamped when the oceans rise.
Yeah.
But no, I think here's what I think is probably the majority case. I think the majority case is that's going to affect the little people. It's not going to affect us because we live behind gated communities. We have armed service. We have armed guards. We have people all around us to take care of us. Yeah. That's going to affect some of those people in Tacoma, Washington, or in Phoenix, Arizona. It's going to affect, some of these Midwestern rubes that, that we need to take the guns away from because they might hurt themselves. So I think that's probably the majority case. I hope that's the majority case. If it could be, I'm open now to the notion that I wasn't open to probably a year or two ago. I wasn't open to the notion that there could be some more intentional planning around this.
Dave, all I gotta say is for the rest of us, come on in. The water's fine.
You got another tinfoil hat for me? I can wear. I want that too.
we'll get you fitted for your hat. Don't you worry.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. As long as there's good snacks, I'm in. But it's. I do think a lot of it. And part of it is then that it puts the lie to the idea that the government is here to help us, to support us. Because the first responsibility of government is to protect the citizens, our lives and our property. We have the right to life, liberty, and now the pursuit of happiness, just as a historical note for Kenny G, was originally supposed to be property, but Jefferson liked pursuit of happiness as a more philosophically appealing term. But so life, liberty, and property, pulled from other historical documents, is the basis of this country. And when they have decided that life, liberty, and property of the elites is important, but life, liberty, and property for you and I and for the little people is a secondary consideration to their own stature and their own prestige. Now, it's one thing if you can say, if John Kerry says, well, if it's down to you and me, Dave, I'm going to protect myself. I suppose, understand survival. But if it's like, no, Dave, you have to die so that I don't get embarrassed.
Or lose any of my status or wealth or power.
Exactly. Now that is insidious. That is criminal. That is
I think evil. what you're describing right here, I think this is the crux of, from my limited understanding of what's going on. And there's a million variables and there's a million different things going on, but it seems to me that the reason the RFKs and the Tulsi Gabbards and all these people are the Rob Schneiders of the world and all these people who are historically ardent Democrats,
right,
have joined call it the Trump team, whatever, the Make America First, Make America Great Again, Put America First team, is because of this, because those of us who are sitting here going, what the hell is going on? This doesn't make any sense, have come to believe, whether we can articulate the way you just did or not, I don't think many of us can, but we've come to believe that the government is prioritizing somebody else's needs above the average citizen, whether it's the immigrants, the government, Wall Street, the media, Hollywood, like name all the usual suspects.
Right.
And so part of the country, this is what I think Kenny G should know. My perspective is part of the country is operating under a set of rules where it's this group of people, these elites trying to take control at the expense of the citizenry.
Right.
And we're resisting that. And 50% of the country, maybe 48, maybe 52, I don't know, somewhere a substantial part of the country is still believing that the government has our best interests at heart. And it's just a matter of like this tax policy or that policy.
Right.
Do you think that that's accurate?
I know that's accurate. I know that's accurate because I interact with a lot of folks that are ideologically on a different side than me. Some of my best friends for 50 years. I was talking to one of them about how
By the way, I'm not old enough to have best friends for 50 years. When
Yeah,
you said
I know
we've
you're
worked together, like there's a substantial
I'm much more
divide.
experienced and wise than you are, Brian. Don't worry, you'll get
That's
there.
right. That's
You
right.
get a few wrinkles along the way too. Just so you know, I can tell you what's coming.
Yeah.
But I'm talking to one of them, one of my good friends. Love him. He's a great guy. And we were talking about the news media, and we were talking. I think it was about Lester Holt. I think he's on one of the big three, ABC, maybe. I think maybe it's ABC. I don't know, but. He says, well, but the big problem with society today is there's too much social media. I mean, we never needed that before. We had the networks, and we could find out everything we needed. And I said, dude, those networks are totally unreliable. No, that can't be true. And, I rattle off some stats about this or that. No, that can't. You must have picked that up. No, I said, dude, you can go research yourself. No, and there's an emotional connection to believing that the world isn't really as bad a place as people that might be on our side are saying it is. It's not really, we sometimes talk about on the cast and other times we talk about, well, how can people not see this? It's so obvious. Well, the reason people don't see it is because they are emotionally connected to a worldview that says that can't be true. These powerful people.
And why is that? And the best answer I have, and I'll let you answer in a second. The best answer I've heard is from Dennis Prager. I've been hearing him say this for years, which is people's desire to be taken care of is stronger than their desire to have liberty.
I think that's true. I think that's a big part of it. I think there's another part of it too. And that is, I think it's an extension of normalcy bias, because if you, to accept the things that you and I are talking about right now is to believe that in the past 50, 60 years, things have changed dramatically in this country from the way that we grew up. Things have and not nice, at best selfish forces, at worst malevolent forces have gained an upper hand in running things. And so if you say, no, the world can't operate like that. I grew up this way and this is normal. It's never going to change. You would have to accept that the world is different than you believe it is. Not only that you want to be taken care of. Yes, I think Prager is absolutely right about that. People do want to be taken care of, but I think even a more fundamental level is people want to believe certain things about the world because it settles them. They can live in the world that looks like this. They don't know how they can live in a world that looks like you and I are talking about. They don't know how they can even exist in that world.
Yeah. And I agree with it 100%. And I think that the reason they don't want to live in that world is because if they did, they would lose their sense of security that they're being taken care of. They understand the rules of the game now. And if you up in the rules, like, I don't know what the hell world that is. So there's that. And also for many of these people, they've spent the last 10 years, at least, if not 25, propping up these entities, organizations, institutions, things like that now are, in my view, going to likely be exposed as a bad guy, depending on how this all unfolds. But if there was a unbiased new, like, investigative journalist who, there's only like 5. I mean, there's James O'Keefe who does stuff. They don't have the, and everybody knows who they are. Like, you can't, those guys can't just walk into the Pentagon. Like, it doesn't work that way. Like, they're and so if we had that kind of thing, I think that the level of corruption and just bad, like, morally bad things that we would uncover, and then those people who are supporting that would have to go, holy crap, I've spent the last 20 years talking about how Trump is Hitler, and what I just learned is I've actually been supporting the guy who's, I think that is just absolutely terrifying for folks.
I think that's true, because I mean, as human beings, none of us wants to admit when we're wrong, and especially when we've been wrong with seriously damaging consequences.
Oh, and imagine like you have relatives that I interact with once in a while online that, and they're not shy about proclaiming this stuff. Like, they're out there, like, they are so confident they are morally righteous and correct, that for that to come unraveled, I don't know what you could do to a man or a person to, like, more fundamentally hurt them, like in a severe way than that.
Yeah, I think all of those things, I think that's exactly right. And that's why, getting back to the notion that we talk about oftentimes of the theory of the generations and the seculum and all that, that's why it takes a crisis of existential threat proportions to change things, because,
to shake that out. Yeah.
I was listening to a commentator that a right-wing commentator that I respect an awful lot the other day on an interview on a left-wing podcast. And he was talking about how he's decided to support Kamala Harris because we have to get past Trump and things can get back to normal. So, this is a smart fellow, and he doesn't realize, I believe, that there is no getting back to normal. There is going to be I would love to get back to normal. I'd love to get back to, Walter Cronkite and David Brinkley and all of that, Chet Huntley, and Democrats and Republicans disagreeing on policy, but coming together and when we're attacked. I'd love to get back to that, but I don't think that's a realistic view of how things unfold in the world.
Well,
and so as a result, it's not going to happen. We're going to have a crisis that threatens to kill us all. I mean, and I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that literally. I think we're going to have a crisis that's going to threaten to kill us all before we get shaken out of our slumber, collectively speaking, and take corrective action to survive.
Well, and I would say we have ample evidence to prove that you're correct in that it's not about getting back to normal. You can look back at the excluding Trump. Let's take Trump out of it. When DeSantis was ahead in the polls, what do they call him? They said he was worse than Trump.
He's worse than Trump.
He was worse than Trump. Okay. You look back at the previous serious contenders for Republican presidents. Mitt Romney was going to put him back in chains.
Right. Yes, that's right.
What was that? What was the dig on McCain? What was the one on him?
Oh, well, yeah. McCain was a racist. Yeah, he was a racist. And of course, you had Sarah Palin who said that she put a target on people, so she was going to assassinate people.
Okay. So you can go back as far back as George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
And every Republican president that's run has been called some version of a Nazi or a Hitler or something, racist, some version of like slave master, some version of that. It's, and I think this is one of the things that is about Trump is that some people recognize it's not really about Trump.
Right.
And some people just can't let go of Trump. And the people who believe, like I do, like I think Trump would be fun to have a beer with. I don't think I'd be friends with him. Like I think I think I'd have a good time having dinner with him. I think, but I don't think he's a guy I would want to like spend a lot of time with.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't believe it's about Trump. I believe it's about what Trump represents, which is people who care about the sanctity of our borders and like keeping the citizen as the primary person the government is there to serve.
Yeah.
And the people who think that you and I do, like the government's turned kind of against the citizenry, I think we recognize that. And the people who believe it's still, all about tax policy and things like that, he's just this evil outlier. And I think that, the reason I'm asking about this is because, like you, I have friends. Like I have a friend that once in a while, like, hey, he texts me like, hey, like one time he texted me and said like, sell me on Ron DeSantis, like tell me like why he's the guy. And we used to have conversations about that, but now it's like, we don't have the same values. We don't have the same beliefs as far as like what the actual conflict is.
Right.
And these aren't really productive conversations anymore. So we don't have them, but it's just that there's a big portion of the country who I think believes that it's really the government has turned on its own people. Yeah. And there's a big portion of the country that still believes that the government is there to serve the people.
Right.
And we're just haggling out how to do that. And I think that's the root of the real issue.
I 100% agree with that. It's to listen to one side, it's like, well, did you hear Trump said this? Do you hear Trump said? And a lot of people are like, I don't care what Trump says. I don't really care what Trump says. It's not about Trump. It's not. Yeah,
I care about the 16,000 murderers here. Did you hear about that? Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, right. And this is where the conversations can't happen because we're talking past each other. We're just completely talking. So one side saying the government is the government and institutions of power are not here for the people anymore. They're here for themselves. And there's this guy over here. He happens to be named Trump. He could be named, Shrek. It doesn't really matter what he's named or who he is. And it turns out that for the most part, it's like, well, he says some stupid things. He says things like, there's plenty of times, oh my, what'd you say now? Well, that's stupid. Why are you saying that? But it doesn't matter. The point is, if you think that this entity that has all the power in the world is against you, you want somebody who's got some modicum of power to oppose that for you. Now, if it ends up being an uncouth, not great speaker who says some things that make you cringe for some time, you're like, okay, well, give me somebody else, but there isn't anybody else.
But also, Dave, willing to take all the fire.
Yeah, absolutely.
That guy has stood up to. There's
Bullets.
no way George W. Bush would stand for that. No way McCain. No way Mitt Romney, John Kerry. Like you name these quote unquote leaders we've had for the last handful of decades. I don't know a single one of them who could have withstood the amount of just barrage of insults and lawsuits and you name it.
Well, they would have tried. They wouldn't have tried because, there's a number of those people I have great respect for. Mitt Romney, there's things I don't like about him, but I get great respect for him as a human being. I mean, he's seems like a solid human being.
That makes one of us.
Okay. Well, there you go. You and I don't have to agree on everything. That's fine.
We have to agree on everything. Yeah.
But there's a number of people there that I have respect for as human beings, but they are not. The day that we're in calls for somebody who can stand up and fight in the mud and be, gross and and all of those people that we talked about, they are people of the institution. They love the institution. Like John Roberts on the Supreme Court, he's all about preserving the institution, made some terrible rulings to preserve the institution. Well, I would have rather he made good rulings that damaged the institution, but made good law.
Yeah.
Well, if you have people that are all about the institution, when the institution turns corrupt, they're not going to be willing to fight the institution. And I think it's pretty obvious. Just a few things we've talked about today. There's corruption in the institution, and it turns out that Trump's the only guy we got to fight. And that's not how I would like to fight.
He's willing to take all those bullets for the people he represents,
right?
In a way that, again, I always go back to the same thing with Lincoln and Grant.
Yeah.
Like he's on his 9th general or whatever it was. And he had this whole slew of people who just let him down and let him down. And he goes, yeah, I know he's a bastard, but he fights.
Yeah,
I don't care.
Exactly. And there comes a time when that's the only thing you can use. That's the only thing you can have because there's nobody else to do it.
Right.
And that's what we got with Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, I have a couple other things here, but I'll save them for next week because if we get started on those, we'll run long. But fascinating. Just again, the speed at which news is coming out now, and the speed at which and one of the things I'm hoping for, and I think that you and I are honest enough on this podcast that I would hope that this be shaken out. But I'm also fearful of not getting like too much in the silo in the other direction. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, exactly.
But there's so much news coming out now that when you look through the lens of democracy is protecting the institutions, like all this stuff is like, well, holy crap, this makes sense now. Like it never made this before. Now it's just I'm just hoping it's not too much confirmation bias. I'm not swinging the other direction too much.
Well, this is why, for me at least, this is why I listen to things that I disagree with regularly. I listen to plenty of things that I agree with, but I also listen to things that I disagree with to see, and talk to people that I disagree with, because it's like, okay, well, poke a hole in my logic. I don't want to hear your emotional argument. I want to hear your logical argument. Tell me something I don't know. I'm willing to listen, and I usually say I'm willing to listen if you are, but I've dropped the second part because nobody's willing to listen.
Yeah. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody you really disagree with and ask them like where do they think the government is really here looking out for our best interest, or do they believe the government has like kind of shifted the rules? Have you ever had a conversation like that with somebody you disagree with?
I had a conversation with another friend at Red Robin not too long ago about that same idea. I said, how do you square all of these things that are happening with what appears to be your notion that the institutions are not generally corrupt? And, here's the problem with here's the problem with confirmation bias. Confirmation bias allows you to only consider a certain number of facts. And if there are other facts that you admit are other facts, you have to say, yeah, those are facts, but they're not important facts. These are the important facts. And so that's how that conversation goes. And it's terribly frustrating to me because I'm saying,
so everyone agrees that both of you agree on all the facts, just you weight them differently is what you're saying. Then.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Well, and that's terribly frustrating because I'll come back to the idea of how are you objectively weighting this thing that you say is true and this thing that I say is true? How are you objectively weighting them the same? And, at the end of the day, it just comes down to what people are emotionally, the narrative that people are emotionally bought into. And if you have enough time and you have an honest person that you're debating with, you can get to that. But it almost never gets to that because then people get upset.
Well, I guess luckily for us then that Kamala Harris is running on joy as her platform, since we're emotional creatures. That's what we all want.
That's right. We all just want joy.
I guess worst case scenario, we get a whole bucket of joy.
Is that what they're calling it these days? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the carrot. They don't show you the stuff behind the curtain, but joy is the carrot of the week or the month or the season for sure.
There you go.
All right, Dave. Well, hey, as Dave mentioned, we're talking to Kenny G, a guy or a gal who lives, 60 years in the future, and no doubt is gonna be looking back and saying, "What the hell is going on there?" Because it's probably gonna get worse before it gets better, is what Dave and I are supposing. Sure. And we'd love to know where you think we got it right, where you think we got it wrong. So Rumble has a great comment section. You can drop us a line there. Tell us the parts that you think we got correct, and then tell us the parts you think we've actually lost our minds on. Or you can go to unsilentpodcast.com. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.